Most people live with the assumption that their mind belongs to them, that their thoughts are the result of conscious choice, that the voice in their head is something they control. But if you observe carefully, you begin to see something very different. The mind is not neutral. It is not empty space waiting for you to decide what to think. It is always being programmed, always absorbing, always adapting to what it has experienced before. And if you are not programming it intentionally, then something else is doing it for you. Your past, your fears, your environment, your culture, your wounds, your habits, the expectations of other people. All of these become instructions, quietly shaping the way you see the world without you even noticing it. From a psychological point of view, the brain is built for survival, not for truth. Its primary job is to protect you from danger, and to do that it relies on patterns. Whatever you experienced repeatedly in the past becomes familiar, and whatever is familiar feels safe to the nervous system, even when it is painful or limiting. This is why a person can grow up in criticism and later expect rejection everywhere. This is why someone who lived in chaos can feel uncomfortable in peace. The mind keeps repeating what it learned, not because it is right, but because it feels known. When people say they want to change their life, they often try to change their actions first. They set goals, they make plans, they push themselves to behave differently. But the deeper programming remains the same. And when the inner program does not change, the outer results rarely change for long. The mind pulls you back to what it believes is normal. You may want success, but if your mind is programmed for self-doubt, you will hesitate at the moment that matters. You may want connection, but if your mind is programmed for rejection, you will see distance even where there is none. The world starts to look like the program you are running. This is not weakness. It is conditioning. Every human being is shaped by repetition. The thoughts you hear most often become the thoughts you think automatically. The emotions you feel most often become the emotions your body expects. The experiences you go through most often become the reality your brain predicts. Over time, prediction becomes perception. You don't just react to life. You start seeing life through the lens your mind has built. And this is where responsibility begins, not as blame, but as awareness. If the mind can be programmed unconsciously, it can also be programmed consciously. But that requires something most people avoid, which is paying attention to what is happening inside. It requires noticing the sentences you repeat to yourself, the stories you assume are true, the reactions that feel automatic. Because once you see the program, you are no longer completely controlled by it. You begin to have a choice. Programming the mind does not mean pretending everything is positive. It means becoming aware of what has been written into you, and deciding what should stay and what should not. It means understanding that your current way of thinking is not your destiny. It is a pattern that was learned, and what is learned can be changed with repetition, with intention, and with patience. The moment you realize that your mind has been programmed is the moment you stop being only a product of your past and start becoming the author of your future. And once you understand that, you can no longer say that reality is happening only to you. You begin to see that, in ways both subtle and powerful, reality is also responding to the way your mind has been trained to see it. If the mind is always being programmed, the next thing we need to understand is how that programming actually happens. Most people assume that the mind changes when you decide to change it. You tell yourself you want confidence, so you repeat the word confidence. You say you want success, so you think about success. But the subconscious mind does not work according to what you wish for. It works according to what you repeat, especially what you repeat with emotion. The nervous system listens to familiarity, not to desire. This is why people can sincerely want a different life and still keep recreating the same situations. On the surface, they are asking for something new, but underneath, the internal language has not changed. The brain keeps hearing the same messages it has heard for years. I'm not good enough. This won't last. Something will go wrong. People always leave. I can't trust this. These sentences may not always be spoken out loud, but they exist in the background, running like a quiet program that never turns off. And the subconscious accepts repetition as truth, regardless of whether that truth helps you or hurts you. From a psychological perspective, this makes sense. The brain is designed to predict what will happen next based on what has happened before. Prediction helps survival. If something painful happened repeatedly in the past, the brain assumes it will happen again, and it prepares you for it. But the problem is that preparation often becomes creation. When you expect rejection, you behave more guarded. When you expect failure, you hesitate. When you expect loss, you hold back. And those small changes in behavior influence the outcome, which then confirms the belief. The loop continues not because the world is fixed, but because the program is fixed. People often try to change this by forcing positive thoughts, but forced thoughts rarely reach the subconscious. The deeper mind listens to what feels believable, not to what sounds nice. If someone has repeated self-doubt for 20 years, saying one sentence of confidence will not override that pattern. Programming requires consistency. It requires repetition that is strong enough, frequent enough, and emotionally real enough that the brain begins to accept it as the new normal. This is why the internal language you use every day matters more than the goals you set once in a while. The subconscious is always listening. It listens when you talk about yourself, when you react to mistakes, when you describe your future, when you interpret other people's behavior. Every time you say, "This always happens to me," the brain records it. Every time you say, "I can't handle this," the nervous system learns that you are not safe. Every time you say, "Nothing ever works," the mind adjusts its expectations. Over time, those expectations shape perception, and perception shapes reality. Changing this does not mean lying to yourself. It means choosing your repetition carefully. It means speaking in a way that allows growth instead of reinforcing limitation. Instead of repeating that nothing works, you notice what is working, even if it is small. Instead of repeating that you always fail, you recognize that you are learning. Instead of telling yourself that you are not ready, you allow the possibility that readiness comes through action, not before it. These shifts may seem simple, but to the subconscious they are instructions, and instructions repeated often enough become identity. What we call reality is not only what happens outside of us. It is also what the brain is prepared to see, prepared to expect, prepared to respond to. When the internal language changes, the nervous system changes. When the nervous system changes, behavior changes. And when behavior changes, the world begins to respond differently, not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you, but because the program you are running is no longer the same. The subconscious does not argue, it does not analyze, and it does not judge. It simply accepts what you repeat and turns it into the lens through which you live your life. And once you understand that, you realize that every thought you practice is not just a reaction to reality. It is a line of code, quietly telling reality what to become. Once we begin to see how repetition programs the mind, the next layer becomes even more important and often more difficult to notice. It is not only the words you repeat that shape your reality, but the emotional state from which those words come. People tend to believe that actions create results, and to some extent that is true. But actions do not come out of nowhere. They come from a state of mind, and that state of mind is deeply connected to the emotional patterns stored in the nervous system. Before you act, before you speak, before you decide, your body has already formed a feeling about what is happening. And that feeling quietly directs the way you respond to the world. From a psychological point of view, the brain is constantly scanning for signals of safety or danger. This process happens automatically below conscious awareness. If your nervous system is used to tension, it will look for problems even in neutral situations. If your nervous system is used to disappointment, it will expect things to go wrong even when there is no clear sign of failure. This is not because you want negativity. It is because the body remembers what it has felt many times before, and it prepares you to feel it again. The emotional state becomes the filter through which reality is interpreted. You can see this clearly in everyday life. Two people can walk into the same situation and experience completely different realities. One sees opportunity, the other sees risk. One feels curious, the other feels threatened. The external world is the same, but the internal state is different, and that internal state shapes perception. When the body is tense, the mind becomes narrow. When the body feels safe, the mind becomes open. This is why emotional regulation is not just about feeling better. It is about seeing more clearly. Many people try to change their life by forcing themselves to act differently, while their emotional state remains the same. They push themselves to be confident while feeling afraid. They try to trust while expecting betrayal. They attempt to stay calm while their nervous system is already in survival mode. The result is exhaustion, because the body and the mind are moving in opposite directions. Real change begins when the emotional pattern itself starts to shift, when the nervous system learns that it does not always have to react the way it did in the past. This does not happen through willpower alone. The nervous system changes through experience, through awareness, and through repetition of new states. When you allow yourself to pause instead of reacting immediately, the brain learns something new. When you stay present in a moment that would normally trigger fear, the body begins to understand that the situation is not as dangerous as it expected. When you practice calm, even in small moments, the nervous system slowly updates its prediction about the world. Over time, what once felt threatening starts to feel manageable, and what once felt impossible starts to feel possible. As the emotional state changes, behavior changes naturally. You do not have to force yourself as much, because your reactions are no longer coming from the same place. You speak differently when you are not expecting rejection. You make decisions differently when you are not expecting failure. You notice opportunities when your mind is not occupied with danger. And because your behavior changes, the responses you get from the world also change. People react differently to someone who feels grounded than to someone who feels tense. Situations unfold differently when you approach them with clarity instead of fear. What we often call reality is deeply influenced by the state of the nervous system experiencing it. When the body lives in survival mode, the world looks hostile. When the body learns safety, the world begins to look full of possibility. This is not because the outside suddenly transforms, but because perception, choice, and action are no longer controlled by the same emotional program. Your emotional state speaks to reality before your words do, before your plans do, before your effort does. It tells the world what you expect, what you allow, and what you believe is possible. And when that state begins to change, you don't just feel different inside, you start living in a different kind of reality. As we go deeper into how the mind is programmed, we come to a realization that can feel uncomfortable at first, but it explains why change is so difficult even when we genuinely want it. The brain does not always choose what is good for us. It chooses what is familiar. And very often, the familiar includes patterns that hurt, limit, or hold us back. The nervous system would rather stay inside a known pain than step into an unknown possibility. Not because we enjoy suffering, but because the brain is designed to protect us from uncertainty more than from discomfort. From early life, the mind learns what to expect from the world. If someone grows up in an environment where love feels inconsistent, the nervous system adapts to inconsistency. If someone grows up around criticism, the brain becomes alert to judgment. If someone experiences instability, the body learns to stay prepared for something to go wrong. These adaptations are intelligent responses to the environment, but over time they become automatic patterns. The brain stops asking whether the pattern is still necessary. It simply repeats it because repetition feels safe. This is why people often sabotage the very things they say they want. A person who has lived with rejection may find closeness uncomfortable, even when they long for connection. Someone who is used to struggle may feel restless when life becomes calm. A person who has always doubted themselves may hesitate at the exact moment when confidence is required. From the outside, it looks irrational. From the inside, it feels normal. The nervous system is not trying to destroy success. It is trying to return to what it knows. In psychology, this is sometimes described as the attachment to familiar identity. We do not only become attached to people or situations, we become attached to the version of ourselves we learn to be. If your mind has spent years believing that you are the one who struggles, the one who is overlooked, the one who fails, then success can feel strangely threatening. Not because success is bad, but because it requires becoming someone the brain does not yet recognize as safe. Change, even positive change, can feel like loss to the nervous system, because it means leaving behind the identity it learned to survive with. This is why programming the mind requires more than positive thinking. It requires teaching the brain that safety can exist in new experiences. And that takes patience. The nervous system does not change through pressure, it changes through repeated evidence. Each time you stay present instead of escaping, the brain learns something new. Each time you allow yourself to try without needing certainty, the mind expands its idea of what is safe. Each time you remain steady in a situation that once triggered fear, the body updates its memory of the world. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Growth almost always does. When the mind begins to step outside familiar patterns, there is often a moment of resistance, a feeling that something is wrong even when nothing actually is. Many people interpret this discomfort as a sign to go back. But very often, it is simply the nervous system adjusting to a reality it has not lived in before. If you stay with the experience long enough, the unfamiliar slowly becomes familiar, and what once felt impossible starts to feel natural. As this happens, your behavior changes without force. You stop reacting in ways that used to be automatic. You begin to choose responses instead of repeating them. You allow opportunities that you would have avoided before. And when your responses change, the results you get from life also begin to change. Not because reality suddenly decided to reward you, but because you are no longer asking the world to match the same old pattern. The brain protects what it knows, even when what it knows is pain. But the moment you show the nervous system, again and again, that something new can also be safe, the program starts to loosen. And when the program loosens, reality has room to respond in ways it never could before. As the mind begins to loosen its attachment to familiar patterns, another principle becomes clear, and this one may be the most practical of all. The direction of your life is strongly influenced by what you consistently pay attention to. Focus is not just a mental activity, it is a form of programming. The brain is constantly receiving more information than it can possibly process, so it filters reality, selecting what seems important and ignoring the rest. And what the brain decides is important is largely based on what you focus on repeatedly. In other words, attention becomes instruction. From a neurological perspective, the brain strengthens whatever pathways are used most often. Thoughts that are repeated become easier to think. Reactions that are repeated become automatic. Perceptions that are repeated start to feel like facts. This is why two people can live in the same world and experience completely different realities. One person focuses on what is missing, what is unfair, what could go wrong. Another focuses on what can be learned, what can be built, what is still possible. The external conditions may not be identical, but the difference in focus changes how each person interprets and responds to those conditions. Over time, those different responses lead to different outcomes, which then reinforce the original focus. This does not mean that reality is controlled by wishful thinking. It means that reality is shaped by what the mind is prepared to notice and act upon. If your attention is trained to look for problems, you will see problems everywhere, even where there are solutions. If your attention is trained to expect rejection, you will notice every small sign of distance and overlook signs of acceptance. If your attention is trained on limitation, your decisions will become cautious, and cautious decisions often produce limited results. The world begins to look exactly the way your focus has been trained to see it. Many people believe they cannot control their focus, but in truth, focus is a skill, and like any skill, it can be trained. At first, the mind goes where it is used to going. It returns to worry, to comparison, to regret, to fear, because those pathways are strong. But each time you deliberately bring your attention back to what matters, you are strengthening a different pathway. Each time you choose to concentrate on what you can do instead of what you cannot, the brain records that choice. Each time you stay with a meaningful task, instead of escaping into distraction, the mind learns discipline. Slowly, the default direction of attention begins to change. This shift in focus also changes the emotional state of the body. When attention stays on threat, the nervous system remains tense. When attention stays on purpose, the nervous system becomes more organized. When the body feels organized, thinking becomes clearer, decisions become steadier, and actions become more consistent. And consistency is what allows reality to respond differently. Not because the world suddenly becomes easier, but because your way of meeting the world becomes more stable. Focus also determines what opportunities you recognize. Life is full of possibilities that most people never see, not because they are hidden, but because their attention is somewhere else. When the mind is occupied with doubt, it misses chances. When it is occupied with resentment, it misses solutions. When it is occupied with fear, it misses growth. But when attention is trained toward meaning, learning, and intention, the brain starts noticing things that were always there, but never entered awareness before. What looks like luck from the outside is often the result of trained attention on the inside. Over time, focus becomes character, and character shapes destiny. What you repeatedly give your attention to becomes the environment your mind lives in, even when the outer world stays the same. And when your inner environment changes, your behavior changes, your choices change, and the responses you receive from life begin to change as well. The mind moves in the direction of its focus, and reality tends to follow the direction in which the mind has been trained to look. When you begin to understand all of this together, how the mind is programmed through repetition, how the subconscious accepts what feels familiar, how emotional states shape perception, how the brain protects known patterns, and how focus directs attention, you arrive at a point where something important becomes clear. Reality does not respond only to what you do on the surface. It responds to the pattern you carry inside. When the inner pattern changes, the way the world meets you begins to change as well. Not in a mystical sense, but in a psychological, behavioral, and relational sense that is just as powerful. People often say they want a different life, but they continue to show up with the same expectations, the same reactions, the same emotional posture. And the world responds to that posture. If you expect to be ignored, your body closes. If you expect conflict, your tone becomes defensive. If you expect failure, your effort becomes hesitant. These are small shifts, often invisible to the person experiencing them, but they send signals to the people around you, and they influence the choices you make. Over time, those signals shape the responses you receive, and the responses you receive seem to confirm what you believed all along. It begins to feel as if reality itself is fixed, when in fact the pattern has been fixed. When the mind changes its pattern, something different starts to happen. You walk into the same situations, but you are not the same person inside them. You listen differently. You speak differently. You allow more space before reacting. You notice possibilities that you would have missed before. Because your nervous system is not locked in the same defensive state, your behavior becomes more flexible, and flexibility creates new outcomes. The world has not suddenly become kinder, but your way of meeting the world has become more open, and that openness changes the interaction. This is why real change often feels subtle at first. There is no dramatic moment where everything transforms at once. Instead, small things begin to shift. Conversations go differently. Decisions feel clearer. You recover faster from setbacks. You take chances you would not have taken before. And these small differences accumulate. Over time, they create a life that looks very different from the one you were living, even though the external circumstances may not have changed as much as you expected. The greatest change happened in the pattern you carry within you. It is also important to understand that reality responding to you does not mean life becomes perfect. Difficulty does not disappear. Uncertainty does not disappear. What changes is your relationship with those experiences. When the mind is no longer programmed only for survival, it has more space for creativity, for connection, for meaning. Challenges stop feeling like proof that something is wrong with you, and start feeling like part of the process of being alive. This alone changes the way you move forward, because you are no longer fighting reality at every step. When thoughts, emotions, and attention begin to move in the same direction, the nervous system becomes more coherent. And when the nervous system is coherent, your actions become more consistent. When your actions become consistent, the people around you respond differently. When their responses change, your experience of the world changes. This is the point where it feels as if reality itself has started to cooperate, when in truth you have stopped sending it the same mixed signals you always sent before. We often wait for life to change so that we can feel different. But more often, life begins to change when we become different in the way we see, the way we expect, and the way we respond. The mind writes the pattern, the nervous system repeats it, and the world reflects it back in ways that seem almost impossible until you understand the process. When you program your mind with awareness, patience, and consistency, you are not controlling reality. You are changing the way you participate in it. And the moment your participation changes, reality has no choice but to respond differently.